there, Cinemaster fans! Hope you're ready for some movie magic. Let's dive right in. At the beginning of our film, we hear a voice narrating that before the great flood that covered the earth, many difficult events started happening. However, we are focused on a particular story, one of many stories that have turned into myths over the years. We learn that at some point, the world was ruled by creatures from other dimensions known as the Ancient Rulers. Earth experienced a very dark era under their reign. In a palace on the island of Minos, everyone in the kingdom worshipped idols, especially bulls, which they considered to be very powerful creatures. Over time, this dark empire grew, along with greed and avarice, not to mention the evil and madness that took hold of humans. Men were consumed by these devilish thoughts and sacrificed the princess to the ruling bull. As a result, a small creature was born, which made this dark empire even stronger. This creature grew hungrier as it grew older. Eventually, the beast was placed in a labyrinth to keep it under control. At a certain point, a new law was introduced in the Minos Empire after a prince in the kingdom was killed. The law decreed that every 3 years, 8 people would be taken from their homes and placed in the labyrinth to be sacrificed to the beast. When the time for the 50th sacrifice approached, we meet a man named Theo, who is raising a flock of sheep with his friend Dano. While walking, they spot someone in a cloak from afar. Dano mentions that his father told him this man is an omen of misfortune, and that whenever someone sees him, something bad happens afterward. When Theo returns to the tent, he tells his father about what he saw in the forest with Dano, and he also expresses how much he misses the girl he loved, who was taken to be sacrificed to the beast. He asks his father how many more people will be killed to appease the beast and avenge the long-dead prince. His father tries to console him, but Theo is deeply frustrated. Meanwhile, Dano speaks to his love, Morna, and confesses his fear of losing her when the soldiers arrive. At this moment, some men from the village, including Theo's father, gather. We learn that Theo's father is the leader of the area. They discuss sending someone to kill the beast or sacrificing themselves to protect their children from being taken. They believe that if they succeed, people will no longer live in fear. One man suggests offering Theo as one of the 8 youths to be sacrificed, but the leader refuses, saying he cannot do that because Theo is his son and will inherit leadership after him. One day, Theo sees wolves approaching his sheep from afar. He runs to save them, but unfortunately, he is too late. By the time he arrives, one of the sheep has been killed. He notices one wolf still there, but it runs away, and Theo chases after it. While running, Theo discovers a tree with a strange symbol carved into it. Looking around, he finds the entrance to a cave where the mysterious cloaked figure he previously saw resides. Theo enters the cave and discovers that the cloaked figure is actually an old woman, with the wolf sitting beside her. Theo talks to her about the symbol on the tree, telling her that he recognizes it because he has the other half of it. He shows her a broken pendant he wears around his neck, explaining that the other half of the pendant is with the girl he loves, who was taken to be sacrificed to the beast. The old woman tells him that the girl was indeed taken but not sacrificed. She reveals that the girl is in the labyrinth beneath the palace. Theo doesn't believe the old woman, but she insists that to save his love, he must kill the beast known as the Minotaur. That night, Theo thinks about his love, who was taken from him. The next morning, Theo's father wakes him up and tells him to take the sheep and leave, as the soldiers are coming soon. Theo tells his father about his conversation with the old woman in the cave, and how she said his love is still alive. He adds that if he wants to see her again, he must kill the Minotaur. His father gets angry and dismisses the old woman's words as nonsense, saying that no one has been able to kill the Minotaur to this day. That day, they see the Empire's ships approaching from afar. At night, the soldiers arrive at the village and take the youths. Theo is sitting in the mountains as his father instructed, but he can't stop thinking about the old woman's words. Meanwhile, the soldiers raid the tents and take the youths they find. Theo, still lost in thought, remembers his love who was taken from him. Suddenly, he gets up and runs back to the village. As the soldiers march away with the 8 chosen youths, Theo distracts one of the soldiers and secretly takes the place of one of the girls without anyone noticing. Theo's father sees the youths being taken and is heartbroken, unaware that his son is among them. In the next scene, we see the youths locked in a large iron cage. Dano notices someone covered in a blanket and checks on them, only to discover it's his friend Theo. Later, Theo speaks with one of the youths, Tyro, with whom he has no prior camaraderie. Theo tells Tyro that he plans to kill the beast, but Tyro doesn't believe anyone can kill it, even though they both wish for the same thing. Each youth has their own beliefs about the beast, and one of them even feels proud of their role in the sacrifice. When they reach the Dark Empire, they are brought before Emperor Deucalion, who orders the soldiers to begin the sacrifice immediately, starting with 2 girls. In front of his throne is a pit covered with thick iron bars, where the youths are to be thrown. Before throwing the girls, Theo tells Deucalion that the beast won't like them, but Deucalion orders him to be silent. He then calls the kingdom's princess, takes an animal skull, and makes her inhale the smoke emanating from it. The princess approaches the two girls and drugs them, making it easy to throw them to the beast. The iron bars open, and Deucalion provokes the beast, which initially does not appear. Eventually, the beast emerges, its horned shadow visible, and its roar shakes the entire place. At this moment, Theo and Tyro decide to seize the opportunity and attack the soldiers, but unfortunately they fail, and the soldiers defeat them. Quickly, the princess orders the soldiers to take the two girls away from the pit, while Deucalion orders his men to prepare the pit because they will throw the 8 young men in at once. After that, he yells at the princess for speaking. In the following scene, we see the young men being held in a place until the soldiers come to take them and sacrifice them. Then we see the princess speaking in a very low voice to one of her servants, asking her to bring Theo, as the old witch had warned her that he would come. When Princess Raffaella locks herself in her room, Theo attacks her. At that moment, Raffaella tells him she wants his help to escape from this place. However, Deucalion overhears and sees everything. Raffaella then tells him about the girl who came last time and is still alive, revealing that she is Theo's beloved. Raffaella tells him to save her, and in return, she will help him. At that moment, Deucalion arrives with his men and orders them to imprison Theo. Theo tries to defend himself but is eventually caught. Afterward, Deucalion threatens Raffaella and orders his men to throw Theo into the monster's pit. The soldiers then take the remaining young men. After Theo is thrown into the pit, the young men are sent into the maze one by one through different openings hidden within the palace. Theo hears the screams of his friends echoing throughout the pit, unsure of what to do. He then hears heavy breathing behind him, followed by a terrifying roar. The monster charges at its first victim to devour her, who happens to be the girl who believed their actions were a duty. Unfortunately, her scream spreads throughout the maze. Theo begins wandering the maze and smells a strange odor emanating from the rocks, realizing it's a type of gas similar to what Deucalion used in the skull. After inhaling the gas, Theo starts hallucinating and imagines seeing his beloved in front of him. But then, he hears a sound resembling rocks coming from the end of the tunnel. When he goes there, he finds Morna, who cannot speak. She uses the sound to guide her companions to her, just as she did with Theo. When she communicates with him through sign language, he doesn't understand her. Suddenly, they hear a scream and run toward the sound to save their friend. Meanwhile, we see Wally, who is utterly terrified, calling for help. When she moves the rocks in front of her to escape, she finds a decayed corpse, becoming even more distressed and screaming. Suddenly, Dano appears, but Wally screams even louder in shock. At this moment, Theo and Morna arrive, and the four start thinking about what to do. Wally insists on leaving the place as soon as possible, but the others say they must search for the rest first, even though they don't know if they are still alive. At the same time, Raffaella is taken to Deucalion to marry her, but when she sees one of the pits open, she runs and stands over it, declaring she is willing to sacrifice herself to the monster rather than marry Deucalion. Meanwhile, Theo and the others reach the place where the girl was killed, finding blood and remains everywhere, as well as the monster's massive footprints. While trying to estimate its size, Tyro suddenly arrives, puts his hand to his mouth, and tells the others to stay quiet because the monster is nearby. He declares that he will kill the monster himself, but needs someone to act as bait. Theo volunteers, and the others hide nearby, armed with weapons they found in the maze, waiting for the monster to approach to attack it. After a while, they hear something approaching and pounce on it, only to discover it's Raffaella. She tells them she has come to help and knows the way out. She also informs them that her helper is waiting for them at the exit. However, Wally doesn't trust her and decides to leave. Theo tries to stop her, but she starts arguing with everyone, saying she doesn't care about anyone and is ashamed to have been born in this village, blaming it for everything happening to them. While she is ranting, the monster appears from behind and kills her with one of its horns. Everyone runs as soon as they see the monster. After running a bit, they find their friend Didi unconscious, but Raffaella helps her wake up, and they continue toward the exit Raffaella mentioned. At the same time, her helper is waiting at the door, but Deucalion arrives and kills her. When they finally reach the door, Raffaella calls for her helper to open it, but no one responds. They begin to panic and try to break the door, especially as they hear the monster approaching. Unfortunately, they fail to escape in time and see the massive monster charging at them. It strikes one of the young men, roars loudly, and kills its new victim with its horns, swinging them violently. Theo, Dano, and Morna run in one direction, while Raffaella gets trapped and can't escape with them. Didi and Tyron flee to a distant part of the maze, where they find water and drink to quench their thirst. Meanwhile, Theo and the others run aimlessly until they encounter a strange man who claims he has been there for a long time, surviving on rats and insects. He offers to lead them to a safe place and introduces himself as Tarag. He takes them to a small opening between the rocks and shows them a map he made of the area, explaining that he's been there for a long time. The man seems crazy, rambling incoherently, but amidst his nonsense, he reveals crucial information. The creature can be subdued when it sleeps. Theo listens intently to this. In the next scene, we see that Raffaella is still alive, having escaped the monster, wandering through the maze. Meanwhile, Deucalion yells at the creature while standing near one of the openings, declaring he will go down and retrieve Raffaella himself. We see this reckless man entering the maze through a door. At this point, Theo becomes convinced that Wally is still alive. He pressures Tarag to tell him her location, believing that since Tarag has survived there for so long, he must know. However, their shouting and arguing attract the monster's attention, which comes to their location and begins pushing the rocks to collapse the area. At that moment, it hears Deucalion calling for Raffaella and heads toward him. And when the coward Diocleon hears the monster's roar approaching, he immediately exits through the door, abandoning the soldier he brought with him, who is swallowed by the monster as soon as it sees him. Meanwhile, Theo pressures Traj to reveal the location of his beloved. When Theo finds the necklace with the pendant he gave her, he becomes more convinced that she is still alive. He takes the map Traj drew and forces him to point out her location. After Traj directs him to a specific spot, Theo decides to head there. At the same time, Didi and Tyro are wandering aimlessly, gradually growing fond of each other. Tyro promises her that he will get her out of this place. They reach one of the castle's entrances and decide to climb out. After Tyro climbs up and reaches the iron bars, he calls for Didi to climb after him and grab his hand. But as she climbs the wall, the monster arrives and stands beneath them. Despite Tyro telling her not to look down, Didi doesn't listen. Unfortunately, she looks down, sees the monster, and falls, screaming, which draws the monster's attention. Sadly, she loses her grip and falls onto the monster's horns. Meanwhile, as Theo wanders the maze, he starts hearing his beloved's voice. Suddenly, she appears before him. Overjoyed, he runs to her, embraces her, only to realize he's hugging her skeleton. This harsh reality makes him realize he must now help his friends who need him. He moves on, searching for Dano and the rest of his friends. At the same time, Dano asks Morna to hide in his secret shelter. He then sets out to look for Theo. When Dano sees a shadow ahead, he calls out to it, but he senses something is wrong. As he approaches for a clearer view, he realizes it's the shadow of the monster coming to kill him. Understanding he can't escape, he calls out to Theo, telling him to take care of Morna. During this time, Theo hears his friend's voice coming from all directions, unsure where to go. Suddenly, he hears Dano scream as the monster kills him. Enraged, Theo throws the metal pendant against the wall, which creates a spark. This spark ignites a fire, giving Theo hope that they might survive and escape this place. Raffaella then appears and reveals the truth about the Minotaur and the reason behind the sacrifices. She tells Theo that the prince was killed by the Minotaur, and that, to cover up the scandal, they fabricated a story blaming a man from Theo's village. This was done to force the villagers to offer sacrifices as compensation. Raffaella encourages Theo to fight and defeat the monster. She also takes him to the gas source to prepare him for what's to come. However, while there, the monster attacks them with a loud roar. At this moment, Tyro arrives, furious and grieving Didi's loss. He tells Theo to escape and charges at the monster. The monster, in turn, attacks Tyro with its horns, but Tyro continues to fight. Theo leaves Raffaella in a safe spot, instructing her to hide underwater when the monster appears. He then returns to face the monster. When he arrives, he finds he cannot save Tyro, who has already died. Overcome with anger, Theo shouts and calls out to the monster, luring it toward him. The monster charges at Theo, but Theo jumps at the last moment, dodging the attack. The monster crashes into the wall, creating more space for the gas to spread. The monster, now dizzy from the gas, has part of its horn broken. Theo searches for the pendant to ignite the fire, but notices it hanging from the monster's horn. As the monster stumbles in a different direction, Theo leaps onto it, retrieves the pendant, and heads back to the same spot. The monster sees Theo and chases him again, but Theo changes direction and goes to Raffaella to escape the fire. Along the way, he strikes the pendant against the walls until it finally creates a spark. The fire spreads rapidly, and Theo reaches Raffaella just in time. The fire engulfs the area, killing the monster. The explosion is so powerful that it breaks through to the castle above, killing Diocleon and his servants as the bull statue collapses on them. Theo and Raffaella escape underwater. Diocleon and his servants perish in the explosion. Emerging from the water, Theo and Raffaella are still fearful of the monster. Suddenly, they hear footsteps behind them and discover that the Minotaur is still alive, though gravely injured. As soon as it sees Theo, it attacks. In that moment, Theo spots the broken horn lying nearby. He grabs it and stabs it into the monster's mouth. However, the monster fiercely charges at Theo, pushing him against the wall. This causes the horn to pierce through the monster's body, killing it. Afterward, Theo and Rafaela search for an exit from the maze. Along the way, Theo finds Morna and Traj still hiding. He calls out to them and takes them along. As they walk, the place begins to collapse. The group continues until they find an exit and see sunlight. They find themselves in the main hall, where Diocleon lies severely injured but still alive. Rafaela approaches him and strangles him to ensure a better future for the people, and thus concludes the events of our film today. Stay tuned for more videos. Goodbye.